The diplomatic row between the U.S. and China over a controversial opinion piece may be escalating. The U.S. administration is reportedly weighing whether to expel Chinese journalists working in America after China expelled three reporters working for the Wall Street Journal in China. It all started after the paper carried an opinion piece titled "China is the Real Sick Man of Asia. How far will things go? Where is the way out?" I'm joined in Washington, D.C. by Rick Dunham, co-director of the Global Business Journalism Program at Tsinghua University. In Boston by Jason Chan, an attorney with the law firm Seed, Chan and Associates LLC, and in Beijing via Skype by Liu Yunyun, assistant executive editor and chief commentator from Beijing Review. Welcome to all of you. First, let's take a listen to what the spokesperson of China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs had to say on Wednesday.
The
Wall Street Journal recently made contact with the Chinese government. It admitted its mistake in publishing an opinion piece which carried a headline that was deemed racist and learned a lesson from it. But the paper has so far not responded to China's demands.
So basically, China's demand has been that the paper look into the matter, find out who made the decision, why such a headline was published, and then China also wanted the paper to retract the title and also apologize formally. So far, the Wall Street Journal said they regret such a title, but they haven't used words such as "I'm sorry," "we're sorry," or we apologize. So, Rick, let me go to you first. How do you look at the development of the situation? It's been about a week since we started to see this topic being discussed on the press conference, the routine press conferences of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and it seems that things have developed pretty rapidly. What do you think is at play here?
Well, I think you have to divide it into three component pieces. The first is the commentary, the column in the Wall Street Journal.
I don't hear anything.
And the subject matter itself was controversial, but it was something that's open for public discussion about the health of the Chinese economy. The headline was widely viewed by Chinese Americans, Asian Americans, and many people who understand China as being racist, as being objectionable. And so it was controversial in the United States as well as China. The second part was the Chinese government kicking out Wall Street Journal reporters and editors from China who had nothing to do with what happened at the headquarters with that story. The third part that I find very disturbing is discussion within the Trump White House about retaliating against Chinese journalists in the United States. I don't think anything will be served by an escalation of this. I think what we need to do is have some debate within the United States and possibly discussion within the Wall Street Journal about whether to change the headline online. You can't change it in the newspaper itself. And to formally say, we're sorry, not just to say we regret it if anybody took it the wrong way.
Yunyun, let's get the Chinese perspective here. It seems that, especially after what we've heard from the spokesperson, the Wall Street Journal approached China once again, but they did it in a low-key way, and they didn't apologize. They haven't apologized formally. What do you think is preventing them from really responding in a formal way to China's request, which is to look into the matter and just say, we apologize?
Well, I think I read today's report a few hours ago, and I think it's another misstep of the journal because it chose to apologize to the wrong person. What they don't understand is it is the Chinese people who are offended by the headline, not the not necessarily. The Foreign Ministry is only reacting to the people's concerns. And by apologizing to the Foreign Ministry, not to the Chinese people, and we can see how self-righteous the journal is. And actually, this preconception is conforming to the recent tendency in the U.S. policies toward China, separating the Chinese government from its people. But what they don't know about the Chinese people is, let me remind you something which happened when I was a teenager. People actually sent calcium tablets to the Foreign Ministry, complaining that the ministry was too weak and too soft when it was confronted with fake charges and malicious attacks from the West. And now, since the foreign ministry has more leverage, and I think it can better address the concerns of the people.
Yeah. I'm sorry to interrupt you here. It seems that the audio is not very clear, but we seem to get the gist of what you're talking about. Let me go back to Rick in the United States once again. Rick, you know China pretty well. You have worked in China with Chinese colleagues, with the Chinese government, for instance. What do you think from the Chinese side of the message that has so far been missed by the American journalistic circles or the U.S. administration when they're looking at the strong reaction from China? Is China really being overly sensitive here, or has China really overreacted? I mean, we have to note that China has not asked papers or writers or editors to apologize every single time they write something negative or derogatory about China. Basically, every day there are, you can point to countless numbers of stories that are very critical about China, but this has been one of the very few times. Yeah, Rick.
This is different. I mean, China should not expect apologies from the New York Times or the Washington Post or the Wall Street Journal for their coverage, their news stories. The United States doesn't ask CGTN or Xinhua or People's Daily for apologies if the State Department doesn't like a particular story. I mean, the media should be free to report the news. This is another step. This is a column, and I think that the Chinese Foreign Ministry and Chinese social media has every right to object, to disagree with the content, and even to demand a change in a headline. Now, that doesn't mean that they can require it. I think in this case it would be sensitive for the Wall Street Journal to change that headline and to say it was a mistake. There's debate within the journalism community in the United States whether it was a mistake or not. The headline was a mistake. I personally believe it was. I believe many of my colleagues at Xinhua think that the headline was objectionable. But I think the big debate in the U.S. is that American journalists do not believe that the Chinese government should influence what is on the pages of American newspapers or on American television. That's a separate debate. But I think in this case, there's little debate that this column itself and the headline particularly were objectionable to many in China.
Jason, let me get your point of view on this. What do you think of the essence of this matter? What are we talking about? Is it responsibility or just basic respect that journalists have to show to a people? Or is it about China trying to dictate what other newspapers are writing about China?
Well, thank you for having me, but I think the big thing here is just because they can write a particular article doesn't mean that they should. Certainly, Wall Street Journal puts themselves out as a news organization, and obviously, even though it might not be illegal for them to essentially write such a headline, it's certainly within their confines to do that. But the bigger question in terms of the court of public opinion is, should they write something like that? For them, certainly they've had people of their own employees are very concerned about the headline itself. And overall, that particular saying is obviously something that the Chinese government is very sensitive over because of years of repression, colonialism, and if really anyone put any type of research into it, they would know that that's a particular insightful term. So certainly maybe they haven't done anything illegal in this particular situation, but in terms of should they have done something like that for their own reputation is really another concern. And I think that's what the objection of even their own employees are concerned in this particular situation, that it certainly takes away the credibility of the Wall Street Journal overall.
Rick, would you like to respond to that? And I think I need to mention one detail here is that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of China did not just expel these journalists immediately. They asked Wall Street Journal to do something to correct their mistake, but they even repeatedly, according to the ministry. But these demands were not met positively. That's when China decided to take one step further. So it is not like China immediately, hey, you stop, you change. They asked something to be done about it before they took further action. Rick.
Right. Well, I think that an important point that was just made is that many people who work for the Wall Street Journal object to the headline, and they have expressed their concerns within the journal. I think this is a decision for the Wall Street Journal management. I mean, but I think the bigger question about expelling journalists in China for the Wall Street Journal who had nothing to do with this is a big issue. It would be like somebody from the State Department watching our show, not liking something you say, and then say CGTN's reporters in Washington must leave the United States. I mean, that's a whole separate issue, independent of the objections.
They can first lodge a protest, right? If they're not happy with, if it is really the case, then if CGTN refuse to do anything about it, or refuse to apologize, or change it, or look into the matter, then the State Department have the right, I guess, to press again or to take further action. I think this is what's been happening here. Rick, would you like to follow up on that?
Yeah, I mean, my point is, in the United States, and even within the Trump administration, there are many people who say you shouldn't do that, that the U.S. government should not retaliate against Chinese reporters in the United States, that it's not the role of governments to do that.
Okay. Jason, however, what do you think of the step that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs has taken? Some people really are saying that this is quite a drastic measure because maybe they could have taken a milder measure, you know, not to renew the visas of these journalists when their visas expire instead of dispelling them like that. What do you think is the possible rationale behind such a drastic measure? Some people are also saying this is to fan extreme nationalist feelings in China at a time of such a crisis. What's your take?
Well, obviously, with the global crisis that it seems like we're all going through, it seems like cooperation is a really important thing, and anything that would kind of get in the way of that would be a concern for everyone on the planet. This is obviously an extreme measure that China has taken. It's not something that China has done very often, especially in recent years. So it's certainly an extreme tactic to try to hopefully have different conversations in the future. But even with that, it doesn't seem like the Wall Street Journal has essentially changed their position on this. So I'm not sure if ultimately that really accomplishes the goals that China wants. But hopefully, regardless of what ends up happening with this particular situation, that it won't hinder any type of cooperation between the two countries or all the countries to really battle what is the most important thing here, which is the coronavirus.
Right, absolutely.
So it's difficult to know right now what's going to end up happening.
Yeah. I do want to say, you know, it's not like we've had a very smooth relationship so far. We've actually have a very bumpy relationship over the last couple of years, and we really don't need one more point of friction between the two sides. Very problematic headline. You know, a lot of people really see it as intentional provocation at a time of such medical public health crisis. Did the Wall Street Journal really have to publish something like this to, you know, strike on the raw nerve of the Chinese people? Rick, what do you think? I mean, I think the whole thing has not been necessary, and I do hope that the two sides can find a way to water this down, to resolve this issue before things continue to spiral out of control.
Well, I will tell you one of the dirty secrets of American journalism, which is that headline writers sometimes write sensational headlines that don't reflect what's in the stories. I often got in trouble with the people I wrote about in Washington because they didn't like a headline, and I had nothing to do with the headline. This is not excusing that headline, which I think was objectionable. I think there's no doubt it's objectionable. But I think that everybody needs to calm down if we can and try at this time to be as cooperative as possible. In this case, it means someone at the Wall Street Journal has to acknowledge error, and the Chinese government should try to smooth things over a little bit.
Yeah, especially at such a moment. I think a little bit of respect maybe would make it so much easier for people to talk to each other, to deal with each other, and, you know, to cooperate with each other in front of a common enemy, which is the virus at this moment. All right, we have to leave it there. Many thanks to Rick Dunham, Jason Chan, and earlier Liu Ying joining us via Skype.